Union County is home, or at least home base, for many of us who call ourselves part of the No Shields family. We who still live here year-round enjoy the gifts of nature and the fair return on our hard work. We are quite a close-knit family who enjoy each other's company when we are together, keep in touch when we're apart, and can always pick up easily again where we left off. But where did we come from, and how did we get here? History, genealogy, family archives, online family trees, and old photographs and clippings help us to piece together our background. In the next few short programs, we will try to explore the past that tells our story. Let's start in Solingen, Germany, with the birth in 1708 of Heinrich Studebaker. His surname and that of his forebears, Father Caspar, born 1646, grandfather Peter II, born 1600, great-grandfather Peter I, born 1570, was variously spelled Studebaker, 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 and so on. These generations, and many before them, were knife and blade makers, accomplished craftsmen evidently, as several were members of exclusive guilds. The output from their black forges was shipped mainly on the Ruhr River, which passed through the valley of their homeland. The Studebaker family actually intermarried with the Henkels family, a name still recognized today for quality cutlery. But by 1661, sword and blade makers were finding it difficult to thrive because of the increased use of firearms as weaponry. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, had left a long-lasting deleterious effect on those who had survived it. They were hardy, thrifty souls, but they were weary from the fighting and the ongoing struggle to survive from one year to the next. Meanwhile, a new world, full of promise, was developing in the West. William Penn traveled to Western Europe, spending time in Germany on behalf of the Quaker faith, concurrently acclaiming America's beautiful farmland, equality of status among its people, and religious freedom. Penn's campaign led to the purchase by German Quaker Francis Pastorius of 15,000 acres in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia, which he founded as Germantown in 1683. Pastorius wrote letters and published articles on everything from beekeeping to politics, and his words must have been intriguing to say the least. Over the next 40 years, many Germans made the life-changing decision to leave the old country and sail to America. During this same period, a large contingency of craftsmen from Solingen, including some Studebakers, had resettled in Hagen, Germany. One Johann Diedrich, perhaps the most adventurous man in the neighborhood, made that first monumental immigration from Hagen to Pennsylvania. Diedrich had close ties to Jacob Rau, whose nephew was Johannes Studebaker. Hearing Diedrich's enthusiastic correspondence with the Raus, on the spur of the moment, Johannes and a few of his other single friends, feeling they had nothing to lose, in 1732 booked passage on the aptly named ship Adventure, bound for America. Although from the same gene pool, Johannes's older brothers Peter, born 1695, and Clement, born 1701, seem much more methodical and practical in major decision-making. With serious consideration and careful preparation, they and a cousin Heinrich sailed in 1736 in the Harl, not as Quakers but as German Baptist brethren. The journey was in 3 parts: down the Rhine to Rotterdam, then to Cowes, England, on the Isle of Wight, and then the final long voyage of 8 to 12 weeks across the Atlantic. The Harl reached Philadelphia Harbor on September 1st, 1736. Within a year, Clement and Peter were writing home to Germany a letter that has miraculously survived the ensuing years. Written, of course, in the German language, it references the impulsive Johannes, whose headlong trek to America in 1632 had evidently turned out all right. As to your question regarding Brother John, there is, thanks to God, no reason for complaint, for life is pleasant here, for we are better off than in Europe, because anyone who is willing to work can make a good living here. In the next paragraphs, the topics of natural resources, steel and iron are plentiful here, also there are many rivers, taxation. Anybody who works on a farm can live a life without worries, for not much has to be paid to the sovereign. Crops, all kinds of apples, much better than with you. You should see the grain, and the turnips here are 7 pounds weight, and they taste much better than with you. Government, the authorities here are good ones. You don't have to take your hat off for a person in authority. They don't harm or vex anybody as they do with you. And religion. If a person lives a quiet and pious life, he may believe what he likes. The wild Indians are characterized as conscientious people. As the letter draws to an end, and it is certainly worth reading in its entirety, before signing off, Clement and Peter close with the beautiful comment of God bless America. Appearing 39 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it remains to this day the first example of the exalted phrase of faith, praise, and loyalty to the country that ultimately became the United States of America. The Studebaker cousins brought their wives and 3 children between them. Heinrich was unmarried, but by 1740 he had met and married Elizabeth Kellogg. They built a log cabin on the frontier in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, just 2 miles from a fort under the command of her brother, Allen Kellogg. On March 3, 1756, 2 years into the French and Indian Wars, 45 Shawnee and Delaware warriors who had been traveling southward for 2 days, killing and capturing recent settlers, burning houses, barns, and granaries, and slaughtering livestock, arrived at the Studebaker homestead. On this late winter morning, Heinrich and his oldest son Joseph, who was 12, were cleaning stumps when the war party descended. Heinrich was shot before he could reach his gun. Joseph was grabbed and subdued while the door of the cabin was violently broken down, and the rest of the family, Mrs. Studebaker, 10-year-old Philip, 5-year-old Elizabeth, and a 2-year-old whose name has been lost, were taken into captivity. The oldest member of the family, Susanna, was visiting her uncle's family at the fort and thus was spared the onslaught. As the terrified little band of innocents was being brutally pushed toward their destination at Kittening, where the Delaware tribe was headquartered, the mother, Elizabeth, who was pregnant, could not keep up the pace being set for her and fell behind. Having no pity on her condition, her captors straightway killed her and the other slowpoke of the procession, the 2-year-old toddler. Joseph, Philip, and little Elizabeth were forced to live with the Delawares for 6 years, until being exchanged at a peace conference. By then, Elizabeth had spent more than half her life as the adopted daughter of the Delaware tribe. She was fully acclimated and thus ran off to return to the Delaware Society. It is said that Joseph also had difficulty in reassimilating into the non-native population from which he had been snatched, and was known thereafter as Injun Joe. Philip went on to marry Christina Miller, producing a son, Joseph, born 1805 in Pennsylvania, among his family of 10 children, who in turn married Susanna Mast. Joseph and Susanna's 5 children included Jacob Studebaker, born 1830 in Ohio, who married Mary Ellen Day and produced a family of 7 children. Thomas Francis Studebaker, born 1865 in Indiana, married Emily McDougall and produced 5 children, one of whom was Gertrude, born 1890, who went on to marry Harley Shields and eventually became our beloved maternal grandmother, mother of Annabelle, born 1825 in Indiana. The Studebakers in this line had continued through all generations to be farmers, whether in Pennsylvania, Ohio, or Indiana. Thomas added Brethren church ministry to his farming duties, and was dearly loved and highly respected not only by his family but by the entire rural community in which he lived and served. When Thomas died in 1926, his widow Emily sold the farm at Fulton, Indiana, and moved into town, later joining the Shields family in Idaho. Her story is one of patience, endurance, and influence, and will be discussed in the family history thread that covers the McDougals. Before leaving this part of our story, however, we need to answer the question put to us whenever any of us mention that we have Studebakers in our background. You mean like the cars? The short response is yes and no. To explain further, the cousins who sailed with Heinrich on the Harl also homesteaded farms, but they also established shops that repaired and manufactured wagons. In fact, the famous Conestoga wagons were often of Studebaker construction. It was that branch of the family, through Peter and Clement, who eventually morphed their vehicles into horseless carriages. Along the way, one John Moeller Studebaker started making and supplying wheelbarrows to the gold rush in Placerville, California in 1852. Studebaker Corporation introduced an electric automobile in 1902 and continued in the car business in the U.S. until the plant in South Bend, Indiana closed in 1962. Obviously, tenacity, ingenuity, fearlessness, impetuosity, loyalty, inventiveness, longevity, thoughtfulness, and perseverance are all Studebaker characteristics that might be among our genetic makeup even today. We owe a great deal to those who came before us and can only hope we will pass on legacies of our own as the future unfolds.